Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining on this Monday. Actually, a pretty hopeful Monday after the Hungary elections, I think. And however bad a week or weekend you might have had, you had a better one than J.D. Vance, who I'll just say that if you have a loved one who's in the hospital who's having issues and J.D. Vance wants to come visit, don't let him, because the odds are that person will never leave the hospital or his track record. So look, this is a special pleasure for me, honor, to talk to Lucian Truscott. I have been a fanboy of Lucian's a very, very long time. He has an extraordinary record as a body of work as a novelist, a journalist, a screenwriter. His grandfather was a four-star general, Lucian Truscott, in World War II, who was one of the most admired generals, I think, by his troops and others. I had an uncle who served under him and just thought the world of him. Lucian is a graduate of West Point and was your first novel, also your first book, right, Lucian?
Yeah.
Called Dress Gray. So before we get started, let me say, whatever you're doing, you should stop and you should subscribe to Lucian's Substack. It's Lucian Truscott newsletter. I think Lucian, I told him I was going to embarrass him, but I don't give a shit. I think really he is, at the very, very top of any writers practicing today in America. His depth of range is just extraordinary. And he's been writing a lot about the Iran War, as you might imagine. So, Lucian, listen, man, thanks for taking the time.
Well, thank you, Stuart.
To talk with us.
Thank you for that fanboy introduction.
Yeah, no, well, it's very heartfelt. I remember reading Dress Gray and just being absolutely blown away. And then I don't know if you remember, we actually had a chance to meet a million years ago on the Mississippi Gulf Coast with a mutual friend at a New Year's Eve party with Dyke's Gifts. But anyway, so, you've seen a lot, and you've known a lot of military figures in your life, both as when you served, I'm sure from growing up in the world you grew up in, and then covering them. Have you ever seen anything like what we have now with Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump?
Absolutely not. I guess McNamara is comparable because he and Johnson got us into such a disastrous, conflagration in Vietnam, and it went on for so long. But McNamara was at least a serious person, and the difference between then and now is we don't have anybody serious in this government,
right?
From the president on down. The incredible ignorance that they have, their lack of understanding of history, of anything about military strategy and tactics. And, I can't even imagine being a general now anywhere, but in the Pentagon, certainly, and serving under these guys. I keep remembering those photographs that we saw of when Hegseth and Trump addressed the generals in Quantico, and looking at their faces. Their faces told you everything you needed to know. They were sitting there in sort of abject amazement and horror at what they were watching. These two cartoon figures getting up in front of them and strutting and blathering and talking utter nonsense and thinking that they were actually telling these guys something. People don't understand that, most generals that are in the Army have been in the Army for somewhere between 25 and 30 years. And some of them serve over 30 years. That's a long time. That's a long career to get where they are. And they do, they put up with a lot of stuff. They do a lot of shit work along the way.
Right.
A lot of drudge work. They pay a lot of dues to get to be a general. They get stars on their shoulders. And when they get there, they're thrilled. It's a thrilling thing for a guy to be promoted, or a woman to be promoted to general. And then to find out that who you're working for are these goofs. It must be just heartbreaking to them. I mean, I think I can see it on General Kane's face when he's standing there with Hegseth. He's got a look of, I want to be anywhere on earth except in these shoes, standing on this wood right now next to this man.
I have known Roger Wicker a long time, senator from Mississippi. We were pages together in Washington. I helped get him elected to the Senate. Our dads were friends. Roger's one of these guys who wanted to be chairman of the Armed Services Committee for a very long time. So he finally is. And what does he do? The first thing he does is usher in Pete Hegseth. And it just totally baffles me. I mean, I don't think Roger would have let Pete Hegseth cut his lawn. Like, literally, do you want this drunk guy with these tattoos, around the house, this weird thing about women? No. And now, it just seems to be Roger is making a place for himself in history as the worst chairman of the Armed Services Committee in modern history. And there just seems to be no adult supervision of what they are doing at such great price. I don't know, let's just talk specifically about the Iran war. How do you see this playing out, Lucian?
Well, you know what? I mean, where do you start? I mean, Trump has no idea about the history of that country. They've been there for 5,000 years. I mean, those people, those exact people that are in the country now, are descended from people that fought against Alexander.
Yeah.
A long time ago, and they've gone through wars. Their civilization is justly, famous as being one of the founding civilizations of the civilized world. And to think that you could, and there's 92 million people there. It's a huge country. If you took Iran and laid it over the east coast of the United States vertically, it would go from Maine almost to Florida and inland. I mean, that's a lot of country. And to think that the idea that they had, I guess, you have to say, I guess, because who knows what ideas they had, that they could uncork some missiles and bombs and make these people do something that they don't want to do is just absolutely absurd. It's just incredible. People have been trying to push around the Persians for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And it hasn't worked. It doesn't work. And they're not going to be pushed around. They have geography on their side, of course. They've got the Persian Gulf there. And not only that, they have a coastline on the Caspian Sea, and they have a coastline on the Sea of Oman. So they have 3 coastlines, and then they've got a country that's completely comprised of mountain ranges and deserts. If you're in the military, the last 2 things you want to hear is, oh boy, let's go attack a mountain range or a desert. There's no water on mountains.
This isn't the plains of Europe where they're going to be rolling the Abrams over the.
I mean, there's no water in deserts. There's no water on mountaintops. There just didn't any. You'd have to boil snow for water, and and then it would make you sick. And so you've got to bring everything to attack Iran. You've got to bring everything yourself. They've got no chance to attack that country. And attacking them with bombs, we've seen and missiles, we've seen what happened. I think the only thing that we've got left now, they don't talk about it, is 200 and 500 pound bombs. Yeah, I think they've really run out of cruise missiles, and they've run out of the kinds of missiles they can fire from floating platform ships. And I don't think we have any missiles over in the Middle East that we can shoot at Iran. I don't think they've got a lot of those ATACMS ones, the medium range ones. And those things are small anyway. The warheads on them are small. Yeah. I don't know what they thought. When a missile lands or a bomb lands, it's very destructive, but very destructive in a small area. It'll knock down a house, or it'll knock down, several houses in a small neighborhood. It'll leave a hole in the ground, but it doesn't change the landscape. It doesn't change the minds of the people that are there. We've known that since World War II. And when we really, for the first time, used bombing as a strategy to try to win a war. And, we bombed, look at what we did in Japan. We firebombed Tokyo and killed, 1 million people and destroyed the city. That didn't change the Japanese mind. What it took to change their mind was a nuclear weapon.
Yeah.
And, I just don't know. I have no idea what they were thinking when they decided to
Yeah, I
attack.
mean, these lessons of history. And by the way, I got to say, there is a fantastic book from Malcolm Gladwell called The Bomber Mafia that analyzes the specifics of the bombing campaign that we had in Europe and Japan. And actually kind of is interesting because it's sort of a revisionist history of Curtis LeMay, which, those are getting rarer to read these days. Somebody has something positive to say about Curtis LeMay. But, I mean, it didn't work when the Germans did it in London and in England. All it did was make them more determined. It didn't work when we bombed Germany, as you say. So, do you think the people that lived through Dresden were more inclined to give in to what, the Allies wanted? I don't think so.
And bombing Dresden didn't win the war.
No, it didn't.
What won the war was ground troops and tanks, but mainly ground troops walking their way from D-Day, from southern France.
And the Russians, you didn't occupy the Reichstag with bombs. No. It took a fierce fight to take Berlin. And it just seems so extraordinarily just careless. I was listening to General McChrystal, and he was saying, so the new leader, they seem to have bombed him and done serious damage to him physically. They killed his mother, his father, his wife, his sister, and now they think he wants to negotiate. He says, I don't know. I'm not sure many people, is that the way you would react? Like, okay, all right, yeah, you only killed my own family, but let's sit down and talk about this, J.D. Vance.
What occurred to me last night, and I wrote it in a column I wrote last night, was the odd thing about the situation we're in right now is basically that I think that Trump, the aggressor, sued for peace for the first time. I mean, it's always it's always the guy that's losing that
Yes.
sues for peace, and in this case, I think we're running out of weapons, running out of ideas,
So we have
running
a blockade. We have a blockade of a blockade.
a blockade of a blockade, and not
I,
only that, the world is running out of oil and gas, and so we and nothing that we did affected their nuclear program in the least. Nothing we did last year, nothing we did this year. So Trump is sitting there with the main goal that he had of destroying their nuclear program didn't work. We now know that they have thousands and thousands of missiles that we didn't hit because they were underground. I mean, I don't get the people in the Pentagon. You can look online and find pictures from Ukraine of the factories that they've got where they're building missiles and building drones. And you can look online and find pictures of the underground bunkers where they've got them stored. Don't they think that if the Ukrainians are manufacturing missiles underground and storing them underground, that the Iranians might be? Don't they think that knocking out those missiles would be very, very difficult? The Russians haven't been able to knock out the Ukrainian factories or underground storage bunkers. And so we're not knocking out their missile program and the strength of their missile offense or defense. And all you have to do is look. I mean, there's a war going on right now. Right now, you can study that war and see what a bad idea it was to attack Iran.
Yeah, and it's really. I hope you're right about this because I don't think others have. It's such a good point that a lot of the miscalculations that Putin made are very similar to the ones Trump made. That, not unlike Hitler, what did Hitler said? I will just kick in the door and walk into Russia. And if you look at the initial full-scale invasion, what they calculated, how they thought that Ukraine would fall. Now, I have to say, as somebody who's been spending a good bit of time in Ukraine lately and was walking around to some of these early battles, it is extraordinary how close that was. Had this thing gone a little bit differently, had Ukrainians not risen up as they did, and people, walking out of their advertising agencies and picking up automatic weapons and going to defend, maybe the Russians could have seized Kyiv, but it didn't work. And now they have less territory than they had after the first 2 months of the war.
I remember watching that and writing about the attack on Ukraine, and that Planet whatever labs or whatever satellite company had satellite pictures
Right.
of that Russian convoy coming from Belarus.
Right.
If you're a general officer in an army, that is the satellite picture you want to see. A road filled with armor and gasoline trucks and trucks carrying infantry and ammunition supply trucks and everything. It's just a gigantic long, whatever it was, 70-mile long target.
Yeah.
And didn't any of them look at what happened in the first Gulf War when the Iraqis tried to escape from Kuwait, and we just slammed that road.
Highway of death.
Yeah, until we got embarrassed about it and stopped. Yeah. I mean, it was just a murder zone, and that's what the Ukrainians did to the Russian column, except from the ground instead of from the air. And they just used. I just love to think of the RPG. It's like it's like $125 weapon that fires a $20 warhead. And that's what the Ukrainians used to stop the Russian army. RPGs. And, and Kalashnikovs. Both of those weapons were invented and have been in use by militaries around the world since the 1940s. Those are old, old, old weapons. And they're still so good they could stop the Russian army
Yeah.
from Kiev. And all you have to do is hit a tanker truck with an RPG and boom, it's
Right.
gone. All you have to do is hit one of these light armored vehicles with an RPG, it's gone. Not to mention some Humvee or something like that.
Yeah.
That's what they used against us in Iraq. They used Kalashnikovs and RPGs. And we were in there. I mean, what did we have? We had F-18s, F-14s, F-16s, Abrams tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles and this and that and the other thing. And are we there? No, we're not there.
Yeah.
We had the same thing in Afghanistan. Afghanistan didn't, the Taliban didn't have a single jet, not one. Not one. And they ran us out of that country. And, you don't even have to study military history. All you have to do is study recent mistakes to see why we shouldn't have done anything at all to Iran except start the negotiation that they're in now back in February. I mean, they should have started negotiating with Iran over what to do with its nuclear program back then. They should have, gone to wherever, Washington, D.C., and knocked on John Kerry's door and said,
Yeah,
"Hey,
I
John,
mean, the deal they're trying to get back to isn't as good as the deal that we had.
no." And Kerry spent 2 years of his life, 2 years, flying back and forth. And,
Yeah.
it just, and he's a serious guy.
Yeah.
I've known him for a long time. I used to live with his sister. You want to talk about small worlds,
Didn't know that.
I lived with Peggy. And so I knew John really well. I spent Christmas and Thanksgiving with him every year. And he's a serious, serious guy. He's well educated, well read in history.
Yeah.
He has the life that he's lived since he was educated, in the Senate and, all the Secretary of State, all the things that he's done. And he did as good a job as you could do with the Iranians. And, and it took him 2 years because the Iranians will just sit there and talk, that's what they do. They talk. And
Well,
they'll talk about this, they'll talk about that. They'll string it out and string it out and string it out because they know that after a while will go away. They've been there for thousands of years, but we haven't.
Yeah, and the idea that, sort of who can withstand the most economic pain, I think the country that doesn't have elections, the people, even if they're very unhappy, they're not going to vote the people out. I think I bet on, I don't know. I'm thinking maybe like North Korea could do it, absorb more pain.
I don't think there are headlines in Iran about gas prices.
Yeah, I don't really. You have a totalitarian society. I mean, it's the same what's happening in Russia. The 50% of the economy is now going to the war. Now, how long can that be sustained? At some point, I think the oligarchs do revolt because it's going to affect their personal lifestyle. But it's just extraordinary. And so let me ask you this. Do you think that we'll end up sending ground troops in some capacity?
No, we don't. I don't know. I mean, I guess those generals will sit there and salute and do whatever they're told. But how many ground troops do we have over there? They keep using this figure of 50,000. But out of the 50,000, most of them are staff people and support people. And, they sent about 10,000 Marines and 82nd guys over there. And it would take 10,000 soldiers, If this town that I live in with about 10,000 residents were armed, well, they are well armed with light weapons, but if they were armed like an army, it would take more than 10,000 people to overrun this little town.
Yeah.
And you got a country of 92 million people. You know, every I just I just wake up every single day and the thing that pops into my head is, are they kidding? Are they kidding? Who do they think they're kidding? And and Trump just posted this picture of himself as Jesus, and he just made like another 82 crazy comments. Does he think that the Iranians don't have CNN or access to the New York Times or the Washington Post on the internet? I'm talking about the Iranian leadership. They can read everything that happens in this country. They can see this absurd shit going on. And, those guys are passing around the lamb and the chicken watching this stuff, saying, give me another cup of tea. Let's watch that tape of Trump again,
JD Vance.
Oh,
I just have to take a moment here. So JD Vance goes to Hungary to campaign for Orban, who gave a famous speech talking about the evils of mixed race families. So, I mean, JD Vance's family, what kind of guy goes and campaigns with somebody that wouldn't accept his own family? I mean, he is just such a deeply disturbed, sick, broken human being.
yeah, and the contradictions that spill out of their mouths. They think that other leaders in other countries,
Don't see it.
like Iran or like France or England or Russia or any of that, can't see those contradictions.
No,
It's
but the Pope is soft on crime. There's not even one prison in Vatican City. So, and instead of having guys out there in body armor shooting women in the face, they just have these Swiss guards, that dress in funny uniforms. And well, look, we should wrap this up. But there's a story that you're writing about now. You're in the second installment that goes back to your days at West Point involving, well, you tell me, because everybody should read this. And I don't know how many installments you're planning, but I'm looking forward to the next one.
Well, it's going to run out when it runs out, but it's about when I was a cadet, me and three other guys were the first ones to challenge the regulation that for 150 years had required cadets to attend chapel. And there we were at West Point, taking an oath to defend and protect the Constitution at the place founded by Thomas Jefferson, the guy that wrote the First Amendment to the Constitution.
A relative of
the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, for crying out loud. And so we handed in complaints and formal papers and all that stuff to try to do away with that. And then a world of shit came down on us. And I'm writing about what we did and the world of shit that came down on us. But it ended up that after they prevented us from filing lawsuits just by stringing out the administrative stuff for so long. But after we left West Point, one cadet and six midshipmen filed the lawsuit and used our administrative remedies to get the thing into federal court. And the Supreme Court found against it 8-0 with one justice. I think Justice Douglas was sick, so Justice Douglas didn't vote for something.
Right. Well, look, it's fascinating. I'll just say again, if you're not, you should be subscribed and paying for Lucian's Substack. There we are, Lucian Truscott newsletter. There's a lot more I'd like to talk to you, and you got to promise that we can do this again, Lucian.
Okay.
But thank you for doing what you're doing. It's a great joy to read. Just your use of language and your thought is just tremendous.
Well,
So
thank you.
thanks. And thanks everybody for joining us. And we'll be back soon. All the
Okay.
best.